The town of Harwick Falls, Saskatchewan, held its annual charity auction on the third Saturday of October, which was the kind of event that sounded generous when you described it to people who weren't there and looked considerably different when you were. It was not called a charity auction exactly. It was called the Harvest Fundraiser, which was the kind of name that made a complicated thing sound simple. The items were donated by local businesses and estates: furniture, livestock, equipment, the occasional parcel of land, and the proceeds went to the parish fund, the school, and whatever cause the organizing committee had decided upon that year. In 1923, the cause was the new bridge on County Road 12, which had needed replacing since before the war and which the county had declined to fund for reasons that everyone understood had nothing to do with budgets. Most of the items sold quickly. The livestock went first, then the equipment, then the furniture from the Tanner estate, which had been appraised at considerably more than it fetched. But that was how it went when the Tanner family had spent 40 years making enemies. At the end of the auction, after the auctioneer had cleared his throat 3 times and checked his list twice, there was one item remaining. It was not, strictly speaking, an item. Her name was Nora Vickery, and she was 11 years old. She had not been put up for auction. That was the kind of thing that happened in other places and other times, and Harwick Falls was neither. What had happened was more mundane and, in its own way, more difficult. Nora's father had died in June. A farming accident, the kind that happened in Saskatchewan, with a regularity that the province had learned to absorb without flinching. Her mother had died 2 years before that, consumption, the quiet kind that takes longer than it should. There was no other family. There was a farm that couldn't be run by an 11-year-old, a small debt that the bank had agreed not to press, and a child that the county needed to place before winter. The parish had sent word around. Was anyone willing to take in the girl? She was described as capable and quiet, which was the kind of description that told you something and hid something else. 4 families had inquired. None had committed. The auctioneer, whose name was Harold Fenwick and who was not a man given to sentiment, had made an announcement at the start of the Harvest Fundraiser about the county's need. He had thought it might prompt someone to speak up. It had prompted polite silence, which was its own kind of answer. That was where things stood on the third Saturday of October, 1923, when Margaret Elspeth Crane arrived in Harwick Falls, driving a borrowed wagon with a cracked axle. A case of winter preserves she intended to sell, and no particular plan to change her life. She was 31 years old. She had grown up 20 miles south, in a town called Osler, the third of 5 children in a family that had come to Saskatchewan from Ontario in 1901, with the particular ambition of people who had read government pamphlets and believed them. The farm had not made them rich, but it had made them capable, which was worth more in that country. She had been married at 24 to a man named Daniel Crane, a quiet, steady man who built things well and fixed things without complaint, and who had been killed in 1918 outside Amiens in the last summer of the war, 3 months before it ended. She had come home from the funeral. There was no body, just a letter and a ceremony, and had done what a woman in Saskatchewan did when her life rearranged itself without warning. She had gone back to work. She had her own quarter section now, 12 miles outside Harwick Falls, land she had taken over from her father when his health declined. She ran it well. She hired Brennan Flett, a Métis farmhand from the north, for the heavy season and managed the rest herself. She had a reputation in the district for being practical, fair, and not someone who needed things explained twice. She was not on that October Saturday looking for a child. She had heard the announcement at the start of the fundraiser, the same as everyone else. She had registered it the way you register a problem that belongs to someone else. There were people better positioned for that kind of thing. Families, women with husbands, people who hadn't been keeping a farm afloat alone for 5 years on careful arithmetic and stubbornness. She sold her preserves. She bid on and won a replacement axle bolt from the Tanner estate inventory, which had been the actual reason for the trip. She was preparing to leave when she passed the edge of the crowd near the auction platform and saw the girl. Nora Vickery was standing slightly apart from the remaining crowd, beside a woman from the parish committee who was speaking to her in the way adults speak to children they don't know what to do with. Over-enunciated, falsely bright. The girl was listening with a particular quality of attention that Margaret recognized. Not obedience, assessment. The careful, economical observation of someone who has learned to read a room quickly because rooms change without warning. She was small for 11, or perhaps she had just been underfed in the months since her father died. Her coat was a man's coat, cut down badly, and her shoes were practical but too large and stuffed with something at the toe. Her hair was done in 2 braids that were neat in the way a child's braids are neat when she has learned to do them herself, which is to say, not entirely. She was not crying. She had not been crying, Margaret would learn later, since her father's funeral, which had been attended by 12 people and a minister who had never met the man. Margaret stood at the edge of the crowd and watched the parish woman finish her conversation and move away, and watched Nora watch her go. Then Nora noticed Margaret watching her. She looked back, not shyly, not with the appeal of a child hoping to be chosen, with the same careful reading the room of tension she had been giving the parish woman, sizing up, taking stock. Margaret thought, "This child is doing exactly what I would do." She walked over. The parish woman, who had seen this and returned with the speed of someone hoping to manage an outcome, gave Margaret the details in the compressed, hopeful way of someone who has been waiting for exactly this. The farm, the debt, the father's death, no family, county placement before winter. The girl could read. The girl could cook after a fashion. The girl had been helping on the farm since she was 7. "What's your name?" Margaret said to the girl rather than the parish woman. "Nora," the girl said. Then, with the precision of someone who has decided that full information is better than partial, "Nora Vickery. My father was Thomas Vickery. He farmed the east quarter near the Keller Road." "I know the quarter," Margaret said. This was true. She had passed it 100 times. "He was a good farmer," Nora said. "Not lucky, but good." There was a pause. "I have a farm 12 miles south," Margaret said. "It's a quarter section. I run it myself with seasonal help. I don't have a lot to offer you by way of comfort, but I have a spare room and enough to eat, and I won't send you somewhere else in spring." Nora looked at her with the dark, even eyes of a child who has been processing difficult information for long enough that she has developed a system for it. "Are you married?" she said. "I was," Margaret said. "My husband died in the war." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Do you have children?" "No." Another pause. The parish woman was practically vibrating beside them. "All right," Nora said. "It was said the way you say something when you have evaluated the available facts and made a decision. Not enthusiasm, not gratitude. Agreement between people of roughly equivalent standing, which is its own kind of respect." They drove back to the farm in the borrowed wagon with the new axle bolt and a small canvas bag that contained everything Nora Vickery owned in the world, which took up less room than the preserves had. They did not talk much on the road. Margaret was not by nature a woman who filled silence with words she didn't need. Nora seemed to share this quality, or had learned it. They rode through the October countryside, the fields stripped and pale, the sky the particular flat gray of Saskatchewan in autumn, and Margaret thought about the spare room at the back of the house, which had been used for storage since Daniel died, and which she had not thought about in any particular way until now. After a while, Nora said, "What do you grow?" "Wheat, mostly. Some oats. I keep a kitchen garden and 6 chickens." A pause. "2 cows." "My father kept 4, Nora said. "I know how to milk." "Good," Margaret said. Another silence. "My father said Saskatchewan teaches you what you're made of," Nora said. Not sadly, as a statement of fact. "He was right," Margaret said. She almost said more. She did not. The farm was 12 miles south and 3 miles off the main road, past a stand of poplar that Margaret had always intended to clear and never gotten around to. The house was small and clean, and had the particular quality of a place that has been kept up by one person who is too busy to make it anything more than functional. There was firewood stacked to the eave along the east wall. There was a kitchen with a good stove and a table that had been built by someone who understood timber. There was a bedroom for Margaret and the spare room at the back, which, when she opened the door, was exactly what she had known it was. Storage, dust, and the 3 boxes she had never found a reason to unpack after Daniel died. She looked at the room. She looked at Nora. "Give me an hour," she said. "I can help," Nora said. "I know," Margaret said. "Give me an hour first." She moved the boxes herself. She did not open them. She swept the floor and moved the small iron bed from the loft, where it had been stored since her youngest brother visited in 1919, and found a quilt in the cedar chest that was serviceable and clean, and had been made by her mother's hands, which was a detail she did not mention. She put the bed under the window that faced east, because east meant morning light, which meant the room would be warm by the time a person woke up in it. Nora helped her make the bed without being asked. They ate supper that evening. Potatoes and salt pork and bread Margaret had baked 2 days before, and the silence at the table was the kind that 2 people fall into when they have not yet established the language of a shared space. It was not uncomfortable. It was careful. "You'll go to school in Harwick Falls," Margaret said. "There's a cart on Mondays and Thursdays that goes in from the Keller Road. It passes the end of the lane at 7:30. "I can read already," Nora said. "I know. You go anyway." Nora looked at her plate. "All right. The rules here are simple," Margaret said. "You tell me where you're going. You don't touch the north field equipment without asking first. If something's wrong, you say so." Nora looked up. "That's all?" she said. "That's all." Nora nodded once. The nod of someone who had been prepared for more and is adjusting. The trouble, when it came from next door. There was a farm to the north, 2 miles up the road, belonging to a man named Fowler, who had 3 sons, and the settled certainty of a man whose grandfather had broken the land, and who considered this to constitute a form of authority. The eldest son was 18, broad-shouldered and unserious, with the confidence of someone who has always had enough to eat, and has never had to consider how that happened. He saw Nora in November, on the road back from the school cart, walking the last quarter-mile in light snow, and said the kind of things that boys say when they are performing for each other, that she was a waif, that Margaret must be desperate, that the farm at the end of the lane was a charity case now. It was said loudly enough to be heard, and designed to be not quite actionable. Nora had said nothing. She had walked the rest of the quarter-mile without changing her pace, and had come into the house and taken off her coat, and helped with supper, and not mentioned it. Margaret found out from Brennan Flett, who had been repairing the fence line along the road and had heard it, and was angry in the specific contained way of a man who knows exactly what he thinks, but chooses the right moment to say it. She went to find Nora. The girl was in the kitchen garden, which was finished for the season, but which she had taken to tidying, pulling dead stalks, turning compost, working with the focused attention she brought to anything that needed doing. She knelt in the frozen-edged dirt without seeming to notice the cold. Margaret leaned against the fence. "I heard about the road," she said. Nora looked up. "It's nothing. It's not nothing. It's not new," Nora said, and went back to the garden. "People have said things since my father died, before that even. When you don't have much, some people need you to know they noticed." She pulled a dead stalk and set it on the pile. "I'm still here." Margaret watched her. "Does it bother you?" she said. Nora sat back on her heels and considered the question with the seriousness she gave everything. "It used to," she said. "Now I mostly think. They know the surface of things, they don't know the rest." She looked at the garden. "The rest is mine." Margaret stood at the fence for a long moment. "That's," she said, and stopped. Nora looked up. "What? That's a hard thing to know at 11. "I'll be 12 in February," Nora said, which was not an argument, but was a clarification she apparently considered relevant. "12 then," Margaret said. Nora almost smiled. the quick, unguarded kind that appeared occasionally and that changed her whole face into something younger. "Did you go talk to them?" she said. "I'm considering it," Margaret said. "Don't," Nora said. "It makes it a story. Right now it's just words on a road." Margaret looked at her for a moment. Then, all right. She left it as far as Nora knew. What she actually did was drive to the Fowler farm the following Monday on the pretext of returning a borrowed post-hole digger and have a quiet word with Fowler Sr., not a threat, nothing that could be characterized as a complaint, but the kind of direct, even-tempered conversation that two people have when one of them has an extremely clear understanding of the situation, and the other one would rather not have to think about it further. Fowler Sr. was not an unreasonable man. He was a man who had not been paying sufficient attention. He paid attention after that. Nora never knew about this, or if she suspected it, she said nothing. Winter came down hard in January, the way Saskatchewan winters do, not gradually, but all at once, as though the country has been holding its breath and finally decided there was no point. The farm went into the particular rhythm of cold weather work. The twice-daily trip to the barn, the fuel management, the careful inventory of what would last until March and what required a trip to town. Nora was youthful in ways that Margaret had not planned for and found herself depending on. The girl had been running a household since she was 7, which meant she had a practical competence that most adults spent years developing. She cooked without being asked to and without fanfare, producing meals from limited ingredients with the efficiency of someone who has learned that food is not a luxury but a calculation. She managed the chickens with complete authority. She had, within 3 weeks of arriving, reorganized the root cellar in a way that was objectively better than the system Margaret had used for 9 years, which Margaret acknowledged without ceremony, and which Nora accepted the same way. What Margaret had not expected was the reading. Nora read everything. Every book on the shelf, which was not many, and then the newspapers that came once a week from Saskatoon, and then the seed catalogs, which she read with the focused attention of a researcher. She asked Margaret one evening in February whether she had ever tried growing dry beans. "No," Margaret said. "We could," Nora said. She had the seed catalog open to a page she had apparently been studying for some time. "The soil on the south quarter is right for it. My father tried flax on similar ground, and it worked." Margaret looked at the page. She looked at Nora. "What kind of beans?" she said. They talked about it for an hour. It was the longest conversation they had had about anything. That was when Margaret understood that the spare room at the back of the house was not a temporary arrangement. She had known this in the way you know things before you have named them, but sitting at the kitchen table, talking about dry beans with a 12-year-old who had reorganized her root cellar and had opinions about soil composition, she named it. She thought about Daniel. She thought about what their life had been going to be. In the way she had stopped letting herself think about it, because the gap between what was going to be and what was had been too large to look at directly. She thought about the house that had been built for more than one person and had been occupied by one, about the eastern window in the spare room that made it warm in the morning. She thought about a girl on a road in October with braids she had done herself and shoes stuffed at the toe and a bag that weighed almost nothing. "Nora," she said. Nora looked up from the catalog. "I need to say something to you," Margaret said. She folded her hands on the table in the way she had when she was being deliberate, "and I want to say it plainly." Nora set the catalog down. "I don't have family nearby," Margaret said. "My parents are in Osler and getting older. My brothers are in Ontario. I have this farm, and I have Brennan for the heavy season, and I have been managing by myself for 5 years, which I am capable of, but which is not the life I had planned." She paused. "I am not your mother," she said. "I know that. I'm not proposing to be something I'm not. You are 12 years old, and I am 31, and we have known each other for 3 months. But I have been thinking about it since October, and what I think is, I would like to make this proper. Legal, if you would want that." Nora was still. She had the expression she wore when she was processing something carefully, steady, thorough, giving it the attention it deserved. "You want to adopt me," she said. "If you'd want that," Margaret said. "Why?" Nora said, not as a challenge. She wanted the honest answer, the real one, and she was 12 years old, and she had already learned that the real answer and the easy answer were not always the same. "Margaret thought about it because you reorganized my root cellar, and it's better," she said. Nora's mouth moved. "Because you are the most practical person I have met in 10 years, and I was considered fairly practical myself." She paused. "And because I stopped at that auction for a reason I didn't fully understand, and I think I understand it now." She looked at the table. "And because this house was built for more than one person in it, and because I think you know that as well as I do." Nora was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I would want that." She said it in the same even way she said most things. But her hands, which had been flat on the table, turned over, and she looked at them for a moment. And Margaret understood that this was as much as Nora Vickery knew how to show, and that it was enough. The county office in Harwick Falls processed the guardianship paperwork in March, when the roads opened. The clerk, a woman named Mrs. Dunbar, who had known Thomas Vickery by reputation and approved of the arrangement, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for a problem to resolve itself reasonably, stamped the forms without delay. Brennan Flett, when he came back for spring seeding, looked at Nora for a moment and said, "You staying on then?" "Yes," Nora said. "Good," he said. "You reorganized the tool shed." "I did." "It's better," he said, which was the longest speech he had made about anything in Margaret's experience, and which was his version of a welcome. They planted dry beans on the south quarter that May, on Nora's recommendation, using a variety she had ordered from a catalog in late February. By August, the field was the best producing quarter on the farm. Margaret did not say "I told you so," because Nora had been right and saying so would have been redundant, and because watching a 12-year-old be quietly correct about soil composition was the kind of thing that did not require annotation. Nora grew 1.5 inches in the year after she arrived, and another 2 inches the year after that. She grew into the kind of young woman that people in ranch and farm country notice, not conventionally, not in the way that draws attention in town, but in the way that draws it in a field or at a market or anywhere that what a person can do is the primary measure of them. She was, people said, steady. They said it as a compliment because, in Saskatchewan in the 1920s, steady was what the country required. She read every book in the house and sent away for more. She read agricultural journals and argued with them in the margins in pencil and was usually right. She took over the kitchen garden at 13 and expanded it until it was producing enough to sell at the Harwick Falls market, where she was known for the beans, which had become something of a local curiosity, and for the curt, accurate advice she gave other gardeners who asked for it. At 15, she told Margaret she intended to study agriculture properly someday at Saskatoon at the university. Margaret said, "I know." "You're not surprised," Nora said. "I stopped being surprised by you about 2 weeks after I met you," Margaret said. Nora almost smiled, actually smiled, the quick, full kind. Margaret Crane worked the farm for another 14 years after that October in Harwick Falls. She was not a woman who made speeches or kept a diary or wrote down the things that mattered to her, because she had grown up in a family that did the work and let the work speak for itself. She had said what she needed to say that February evening at the kitchen table and had not found it necessary to add to it, but she showed up every morning, and she kept the south quarter planted, and she came in at the end of the day to a kitchen where someone had started supper and where the seed catalogs were stacked on the table with pencil notes in the margins. And eventually the supper and the pencil notes became what she had not had in 5 years and had quietly stopped expecting, the specific, ordinary weight of a life that had more than one person in it, something to come home to. On the evening of Nora's 21st birthday, a July evening, the farm in full summer, the beans in their second month and going well, Nora came to find Margaret at the fence line of the south quarter, where she was doing a slow walk to check for breakage after a wet week. "I want to ask you something," Nora said. Ask, Margaret said. Nora stood beside her at the fence and looked at the field for a moment. Are you glad, she said, that you stopped? Margaret looked at her, 21 years old, with the same steady, reading-the-room eyes she had had at 11, standing in the field she had recommended planting at 12, in the farm she had reorganized from the root cellar outward, in the life she had grown into. Every day, Margaret said. Every single day. Nora nodded once. The nod of someone receiving information they had already suspected, but wanted confirmed. Then she went back to the house to finish supper, and Margaret walked the fence line in the July evening and thought about October. About a cold road and a borrowed wagon and a girl with braids she had done herself and shoes stuffed at the toe and a bag that weighed almost nothing, standing at the edge of a crowd with dark, careful eyes and no intention of asking for anything, and about what it had cost to stop. Nothing in the end. A conversation, a spare room, a quilt from her mother's cedar chest, an hour in a dusty room with 3 boxes she still hadn't opened, moving furniture for a child she had known for 40 minutes. The best 40 minutes she had ever spent.